Good afternoon now, everybody. Firstly, I wanted to thank Nick and the committee for inviting me to this amazing audience. I always feel such a privilege being able to sort of bang on about what I do, but hopefully elicit some co-authors along the way. Let's see if this dover works. So, essentially today what I want to talk about is design-led innovation and its capacity to help us visualise visitors' experiences in new technology exhibitions. So what we're really talking about here is technology, people and their experience of it. Extrapolating from that, of course, these new technology exhibitions are areas that are more commonly being used, I'm finding, in museums and other public institutions. I'll show you what they're for in a minute. The role of the position of evaluating a visitor's experience is fundamental, and I can't stress it enough. Without that knowledge, I think we can be spending a lot of money unnecessarily on technologies and on spaces and on curatorial decisions and on archiving and on a whole lot of digital apparatus and hoopla that goes with producing these wonderful exhibitions without understanding the visitor. And how does design-led innovation get involved? So essentially, when I was thinking about, and I come from an academic background, but I also have a foot in industry as well, where we work with understanding and extrapolating research. And traditionally, if you look at the flower and the egg concept, that sort of data we're quite familiar with in a traditional sense. We have distinct academic boundaries, domains of knowledge, languages, knowledge systems, where we're able to, in our own areas, whether you're a historian or an educator or a designer or a computer software engineer, we all have ways in which we understand how to synthesise this information. But the presentation part, if we were to do that to a mass audience, to make it to make it equitable and recognisable and knowledgeable for people who don't have those specific domains and who are coming from multiple communities of practice, which I'm finding, of course, in the museum industry they are, how do we make this digestible and understood? So I always go back to Hein, who says, we need to assess the museum experience because it's newly elected experience. It's a wonderful function, but at the same time, we really need to figure out what goes on. Now, what are, in my the new technology exhibitions that I've been working with, they're called large-scale interactive immersive visualisation environments. Now, of course, you need an acronym for that. They provide galleries, museums and other institutions a whole lot of platforms, if you like. The major ones that I've worked with are digital, cultural, tangible, intangible heritage for places that you can't access and can't archive and can't go to anymore, to places of the future, but also for just general content for digital humanities, for visualisation of science. And most people understand the terminology that it's stereoscopic, it's panoramic, it's 3D, it's mobile, it's ubiquitous. These sorts of terms get thrown around, but I'm not really quite sure sometimes if the people who work with these environments actually understand what they can do with them. I'm just going to profile a couple of them just to show you, just so you visualise what actually goes on and the scale, and you may have been involved in some of these or curated some of them or created content for them. This is, I promised I wouldn't talk about the content, I don't have time. One example though is using, at University of New South Wales, is using these environments for training for safety precautions for OH&S environments and this sort of thing. New ways of understanding interactive cinema, gaming constructs, and of course the ones where I did a lot of studies on is looking at visitors in virtual heritage. Now, I can't take credit for any of those environments. These are the people, Dr. Kenderdine and Professor Jeffrey Shaw, where I'm a research fellow at City University, and our very own University of New South Wales here, Icinema Research Centre, are the people who are building and leading and designing and the artistic leaders of these sorts of prototypes, these constructs. But the thing that I became interested in is what happens to visitors when they're experiencing this physical, virtual melange. And the museum literature says visitors are an active agent in the construction of meaning and determination of meaning. We all know that. We've come through the, the hierarchy of the curator, the hierarchy of the traditional forms of knowledge imparting information. The, internet too on has enabled a whole lot of flat structures for that to change. But the museum still wrestles with the mission and market now. And these terms that I hear for every time I've gone to a strategic meeting around what the museum's going to deliver and why they're going to invest in these certain bits of technology around these terms: experience economy, experiential consumption, customer perception, customer, visitor, user. So what are these experiences in the last 3 or 4 or 5, 8 years that we've been looking at of the visitor? And the clues started to come between the disjuncture between what is intended by the designer and what the user visitor does, or even if they conceive the intention of the designer in the first place. And this comes from our knowledge in product design and also comes from with interaction design and IT. And also intrinsic motivation. Why do people behave the way they do when they don't have to in certain spaces? Why do they do some amazing things in some of these virtual environments that was never intended for or never expected? And I think they're important to think about. So the things that we found out was that orientation, navigation, negotiation of time in the space, that it's spatio-temporal, happened. You can see here, here in Place Humpy, people get to work, navigate through a game console, going through worlds within worlds, and their amount of time that they would spend, they didn't realise that they had been doing this, standing there, while other people were waiting to use the console for sometimes 20 minutes at a time in some exhibitions. The bodily experience of the space, and what I mean by that is a cognition here, it's embodied when it's dependent upon the features of the physical body. That's when aspects of the person's body beyond the brain play this sort of significant causal, physical constitutive part, is very important. And the diagrams, later you'll see, explain parts of that. And the relationship of the visitor and the screen content. I always think about Professor Lewis Lancaster's work. He's been looking at the Buddhist canon, the Buddhist typology for a long, long time, and he's moved from script, from paper, from book, from screen, to thinking about now he actually gets to walk through his type and he gets to see it in new ways, which has brought him out new historical connections, which is fascinating. I'm just showing you some of these diagrams I've drawn up just so you can understand the sorts of prototypes that they've been developing, but in doing so, making you think about the visitor in these spaces. And of course, their participation and orientation in the space has to do with their interface usability. If you're waiting to use something, or if there are too many people in the space, or if it's hot, or if it's uncomfortable, or you actually don't want the pressure of having to use an interface while someone else is watching you, all of these aspects have to do with whether or not anyone's going to interface with the work at all. And you can see also the level of immersion. We talk about immersion all the time, and in the presence literature it actually has to be about a sense of being there and a sense of travel. And the sense of travel, which is fantastic for virtual heritage environments, is capitalised on. You get a loss of self and of course flow, which is Csikszentmihalyi's very important area of research, which is the stuff that, you know, makes couples, for example, a case of a couple, extreme case in Korea, who are game players, forget to feed their child because they become so immersed, or you forget to eat, or if you have teenagers, you know you have to just about physically drag the machine away from them to detach. And that sense of flow is an emotional involvement at the cost of physicality. The most important one, I think, and the one that we're starting to figure out, of course, is the social experience, the individual and the social, and the co-experience here, about the way in which people negotiate in these virtual environments or semi-immersive environments. Some people love to be the performers and drive the things, and this is just one of the examples. There are many different prototypes, and I've been showing you those. Some people hate it. Some people like to watch others. Some people like to be just part of the flow. Some people love to discuss with each other why the thing's broken or why it doesn't work. And these sorts of activities are very different to the traditional types of museum going. So these were the findings that essentially these things we need to think about as anyone who builds anything in any museum around new technologies, and specifically for interactive immersive environments. That it's spatio-temporal, that there's an orientation effect to it, the understanding of embodiment, the proprioception, how the body deals with the screen, the charged environment, performance, the performance of the collective or the individual, and the levels of flow. So all of these things, in terms of research, required further information. So we went and thought, okay, instead of talking to people and interviewing and ethnographic observation, maybe I've done about 3 or 4 years of observation of people in these spaces. We looked at, okay, why don't we look at physical, let's figure out what physical things happen. So we looked at the Q sensor, which is looking at electrodermal activity. We looked at the possibility of observing facial expression video streaming in the space. And we looked at handheld devices again. And we know handheld devices are great. They've been used for the last 15 years in interacting with exhibits, but we also thought not so great because it can take away from the content and distract the play of being in the space. We did, though, however, and I'll say we, and you'll see why I say we in a minute, because being an academic is a lonely occupation many times, is that thinking is an embodied act. That meanings, and I'm reading this out because I think it's a very important statement of Mark Johnson's, is that meaning and inferential patterns actually do depend on schemata derived from our bodily experience and our problem solving. And that we extend our thinking to cognitive scaffolding. So, how many times do you see it where an extension of yourself, you quickly check your phone, your iPad, your whatever. This is happening more and more. And then I looked at some aspects of neuroscience, and they kept coming back to me about, well, what happens at a bodily organism cellular level in these spaces? And that it's sensory, that our thinking could not be detached from its context, otherwise we wouldn't have had evolutionary advantage, that our vision is internally grounded rather than, we think, dominated on the external. And our timing is neuronal rather than organised by sequential arrangements as we think happens. And of course now is a 0.3 second, we're down to 0.3, it might be even less nowadays. The concept of now is that. So we're making use of these patterns that we obtain in our physical experience, and I know that these are all abstract understandings. The concept experience is a fluffy, subjective, qualitative term, which makes the quantitative human-computer interaction academics go crazy, but it's a very important aspect that we need to grapple with. And it was these properties that informed the interaction design scheme and the methods that we used. So we know we make sense through concepts. And it's not just a case of if we have the right apparatus, we'll get it. We actually need to figure out how these concepts are in understanding the process of what the visitor is in the space. And we know that experiences are, mine and yours are not the same, they're multifactorial, and they cover all these things and affect all these things. And they're abstract, and this is the rub, this is the thing that forced us to consider further what is it that we were going to use to try and unpack immediate response of visitors in these large-scale immersive exhibition environments. That they are inaccessible to objective scrutiny and unreliable, and they're difficult to describe the exactness of an experience. So, why am I saying that? That's why I'm saying that. Is that the analysis then, we realised, was a split. It was visitor-led and it was technology-led. So every day in various exhibitions, and I have to say a special thank you to the Melbourne Museum, who let me hang out there forever, and various other museums throughout Australia, we developed this kind of hybrid methodology between these areas. And it required collaboration with our visitors, it required co-creation with the stakeholders, the curators, it had to be generative. We took on an interdisciplinary framework, and we looked at working with our industry partners. And we did this within the Design Factory, where we look at these research-driven processes with design-driven processes and interdisciplinary perspectives. And this amoebic turgid structure, every now and then, through the processes that we went through in trying to understand what goes on with the visitor in these spaces, occasionally we got a bit of innovation. But I can't say that that was always, those circles were always in that space. So we built workshops and we worked with the research leaders. So, for example, various museums ask us various questions about their visitors or about statistics or about the experience of X, Y, and Z. And we started to do that by prototyping. And we looked at these types of different responses. And it seemed like a very messy, long-winded process. But if you think about it, it actually gave a huge amount of opportunity for students from third year, fourth year, PhDs, honours, from multiple disciplines in our university. It also gave technologists and industry people the opportunity to come and do workshops and work with these people to produce and inquire and go through processes with answers that they never thought they would get to. So the types of activities are design, research-led methods, contextual inquiry, paper prototyping, action, painting, this sort of stuff, in order for us to do this thing, to figure out how do we get introspection by participation. And so we went back to the concept of image schemes, and they inform these design semiotics that we use to understand the visualisation of these systems. And I just wanted to show you, none of these we ever used, but they were very important for our clients and also for our students to try and figure out ways in which people could actually describe in the space their felt or their abstract or their conceptual, subjective, fluffy, organic, messy components about their thoughts about these environments. And so you can see just quickly here, these graphic aspects, what they also did was show that how visitors in this space reveal their own responses in relation to working with others. So the process of applying these image schemes and metaphors for interaction equip visitors with this ability to communicate these abstract states of being in their space. And one of the things I thought which was the most interesting was one of the business students who came and was working with one of the people in the museum said, and we are responsible, aren't we, for these visitors being in these places. We build these amazing technologies, but at the end of the day, we don't really know that much, but we are responsible for their being. I thought, oh yeah, okay. And then I'll just show you some examples. So the last decision is to roll out these small iPads that would not be the hero designs, and these are just ways in which people, the students and the various curators and various stakeholders talked about trying to describe things like stimulation or comfort. They wanted to be able to build something that was able to show and share what was to be in these spaces. So we needed something to get direct visitor participation in the space. We needed something facilitated it, that wasn't the hero app. And we wanted something that was predominantly design driven rather than reliant on text. Very simple, are you male, female? We also used functions, drag and drop, swipe, menus that were not new, that did not require cognitive load, that wasn't going to compete with what was going in the exhibition space. And we also had to do it in a way that was across language. You know, how do you rate your feelings, small to large? I thought this was going to be the worst exercise, but over time, our visitors told us the sorts of things that they liked. Simple icons, which also made it very interesting in terms of organising people's felt experiences. Here, tap where you feel a sensation on the body. How does the sound affect your body? So all of this stuff was a way to engage the visitor. How many people did you come with? Who did you come with? Did you meet people new? Instead of saying that through text, you could just do it through simple drag and drop functions. So they were designed to inquire. They were designed to add on to the already visitor research discussions that exist. They weren't necessarily to provide solutions, although the museum directors want to have data for their strategy. They want to know what's going on, and fair enough. I'm just showing you here some quick examples of it in the space. This was at the Hong Kong Maritime Museum. Over 400 people picked up these iPads, and we have data about what they think and their feelings in the space. So the data from there is our next hitch, or our next challenge, is, and it goes back to the cake eating, which I'll talk about in a minute, is that the data from the iPads are sent to a visual environment. So any stakeholder, just like a business analyst who wants to understand the pulse of the stock market, ultimately this data is designed in such a way that it's easy to understand, that it doesn't require specialist knowledge. It doesn't require a whole lot of experts in the field to unpack a whole lot of syntax or numerics like that. It enables anybody to get this part of the presentation part and the digestion part of the cake across the board. And I think that part has been a valuable exercise in itself. So what do we know? Technology, space and the visitor, this triage is not going to go away. And we're looking at now at the effects in retail, in other public institutions like hospitals and this sort of thing, that the visitor's embodied experience is invaluable, and that knowledge, no matter how messy or difficult it is to quantify, we've found a way to do that through collaborative design-led processes. And it also has shifted the way in which our industry partners have taken time out to actually realise, oh yes, we can do something like figure out what our visitors think, or yes, we can actually figure out what demographic is, how, for example, now the latest aspect of research which we're just looking at is how do families interact in these environments, and how the structure of traditional mother-father telling children, you know, that X and Y is here and this was the history of that, has now flattened completely. When we're starting to observe what goes on in these immersive environments, that behaviour, those traditional behaviours aren't existing anymore. So those sorts of small questions by our industry partners and mainly by the museum sector are found to be very worthwhile. And I think as much as it's maybe difficult, and the challenge is it's difficult to bring in interdisciplinary partners and to look at other people's knowledge, expertise, and look at diverse expectations and agendas, I still think it's worthwhile to go through this process of collaboration to understand the question that I'm interested in, which is the visitor's embodied experience in the space. And ultimately make everybody be able to have access to this sort of data and make the presentation and the consumption of that data in a flat, non-hierarchical, non-specialist, I guess, easier to consume and more palatable way to appreciate. Thank you very much. Everyone's hungry.
I know you're all hungry. I've got no good.
Thank you very much. It was a great presentation. Did you do any follow-up study on how people retained the information that they were learning from the experience, from the visitor experience?
If we were allowed to stay longer in the spaces, I think with visitor research, there's the sort of formative, and the summative. I'm telling you stuff you already know. And a lot of the sort of analysis was post. And I think it's very valuable to do it directly in the space. And we did that with our visitors, our users. But we only had certain amounts of time, and every time we had to apply for ethics to do that, and every time we had to make sure the curator and the manager and the director were all happy about it, and that logistically made our data pool small. We've done it 5 times, and the minute that the visitors know that they're doing a certain workshop, it changes the ways in which they're approaching their contribution, if you like. So I don't have an answer for it, but I do know that the design processes through their interface, through not having someone ask you a survey question, freed them up in many ways. And the best part was when you observed them using the iPads and working with each other, then it became a question of, hang on, we're looking at them now using the iPads around the questionnaire, not about the content. So there's still a lot of parts that need to be extrapolated, I think. And technology always gets in the way.